I'm very excited about because we're going to talk about how it all goes wrong. And to talk about how it all goes wrong is our new friend Tor. Tor is the principal consultant at Mnemonic AS. Mnemonic is a cybersecurity company based in Oslo. Tor, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Is the sound okay? So first of all, thanks everybody for coming. And I'm here to talk about real world crypto mistakes. And so who am I to talk about this? Like that? It's good. Okay, thanks. So I've been doing cybersecurity since 2006. Started out doing crypto research for the last 13 years. I've been doing a little bit of everything, a little bit of red teaming, a little bit of security architecture, some security audits, and some blue team. Yeah. So I guess not all of you are familiar with Mnemonic. For those who don't know us, we are the largest cybersecurity company in the Nordics. We're about, I think, 350 people now. We do managed detection and response. We do incident response services. We work with security products and system integration, and also do some consulting. Some of you might be familiar with the recent zero-day vulnerabilities in Ivanti EPMM, but that story is for a different talk, because today we're going to talk about crypto. And so a little bit of motivation. So modern cryptography is a discipline with less than 50 years of history. So the ball really got rolling in the mid-1970s with Diffie-Hellman and RSA, and also the data encryption standard DES. And in the early years, there was quite a bit of innovation and evolution, but also quite a few dead ends. And I think it's only over the last 10, 15 years that we've started to reach some degree of technical maturity with core primitives that are pretty stable and where we know how to use them and combine them, at least in theory. So in 2008, there was the MD5 considered harmful today paper where they broke the MD5 algorithm using a cluster of 200 PlayStations. And in 2017, we got the first collisions on the SHA-1 hash function. But if you look at the kind of core crypto primitives today, they're pretty solid. So, which means that a lot of current research is looking at stuff like quantum and kind of things that are not quite immediately as problematic. However, somehow practice is a lot harder than theory. So can everybody who's recently sent an encrypted email using GPG please raise their hands? There are a few hands, in fact, not very many. It turns out that kind of doing this in practice is a lot harder than it should be, right? And so I think also we should try to have a little bit of fun. So I'm going to try to keep this pretty lighthearted and simple, and not dive too deeply into the weeds. So since this is my talk, I get to be a little bit opinionated and air some of my pet peeves. And so one of the things that really annoys me is kind of the gratuitous cryptography that only adds complexity and doesn't really solve anything. And I've also had the pleasure of dealing with some very broken cryptographic schemes where it turns out that the bulletproof crypto somehow relies on a weak password or an unpatched server or a lost key. Oops. And there is a lot of great crypto research out there. There's a lot of good theory. The difficult part is making this thing work consistently in practice at scale. And this is actually why the previous talk on DNSSEC, I think that stuff is really cool, because it's one of the examples of people doing something that's actually pretty complicated and with crypto and making it work. Anyway, I'm going to talk about three main topics today where we see that crypto fails. And the first one, this is a quote by Robert Morris Sr., who was a chief scientist at the NSA in the 80s and 90s. He also wrote the original password hashing algorithm for Unix. And at Crypto 95, he said, rule number 1 of cryptanalysis, check for plain text. And that's kind of what it boils down to. A lot of the time, going around the crypto is much easier than breaking it. And so you want to check for plain text. And I guess some people have seen this slide from the Snowden files, which is an example of the NSA basically following Robert Morris's advice. Look for plain text. So the encryption goes away here. And so you really clear text traffic going between the data centers on the back end. And I think the Snowden revelations pissed off a lot of people quite rightfully. And from what I know, Google started encrypting their cross data center traffic pretty quickly after this thing came out. And my understanding is that they actually implemented encryption on the application layer to make it really end-to-end. And in most organizations I've seen, that would have been really hard because doing it on the application level layer tends to add a lot more complexity than doing it on, for example, point-to-point traffic. So, well, anyway, non-crypto. Here's another example of non-crypto, base64 encryption. You would be surprised at the amount of interesting stuff I found that's been base64 encrypted. And the joke is, of course, that base64 is not secure and not cryptography. Another fun one. This is a vulnerability in Microsoft's Kerberos key distribution center service in Windows. And so I guess the details don't really matter, but what's important to know is that the Kerberos service is the one that issues tickets to kind of access other stuff. So it's a little bit important. And of course, if you're asking this service for a ticket to go somewhere, you need to authenticate those requests, right? So the fun thing here was that this was the bug, that the service would accept any algorithm that was provided by the underlying crypto library, including CRC32, which again is not crypto. So you could basically forge a ticket request by signing it with CRC32, which was kind of bad at the time. You do have a very similar version of this, which happened when JSON Web Tokens were new, and you could make a token using the null signature scheme because RFC 7519 allows you to set algorithm none, and most JWT libraries check this now, but at some point they didn't, and so you could basically make your own tokens and not sign them and have them accepted, which was kind of fun. So I think I've kind of beaten this point a little bit to death. So what do you do here? Well, if you want to use proper crypto, you need to actually know what you want to accomplish and where you do need to use crypto and make sure that you're actually doing that. And I think a second point is that you should take a few steps back and look at your threat model every so often to make sure that your assumptions actually remain valid and that suddenly you don't have, for example, quantum computers that can break all your old crypto. So this is a pretty common crypto fail, not using crypto. The next category I'm going to talk about is what happens when you start rolling your own. So you see that you need to do crypto and you do some crypto-ish stuff and it kind of works, you think. but it's put together in a bit strange way, and it might not actually be as secure as you think it is supposed to be. So there was this essay a few years ago, where the main premise was that if you have to type the letters AES into your source code, then you're doing something wrong. And I think kind of the main thing here is that if you're typing the letters AES into your source code, the advanced encryption standard, then you're getting into very, very deep water very quickly. And most of the time, what you want to be doing, you want to have confidentiality, you want to have integrity, you want to have all these kind of higher order crypto functionalities for your service doing whatever. You don't want to do kind of crypto plumbing and implement the low level details. Unfortunately, that's what happens a lot of the time anyway. So one kind of big problem from my point of view is that you have a lot of libraries that offer low-level crypto APIs that kind of provide any kind of algorithm that you might want to use. So the problem is that you need to assemble it, and you probably don't have a PhD in cryptographic engineering to do so. In fact, I have a PhD in cryptographic engineering, and I don't want to do it. So what I see happen all the time is that people try to build stuff, and the assembly kind of works out like the play table and chair. So, and to use another metaphor, so as Furubakudo explains it, in martial arts classes around the world, the master demonstrates how you should do it, and the student watches, and the student copies, and the student gets the left and right mixed up. And basically, if you have 4 degrees of freedom, then you have 1 way to do it right and 15 ways to do it wrong. So the odds here are not in your favor. Most likely, there's going to be something that's not in the right position, some option that has the wrong value, and you don't know this, and who can blame you? So basically, correctly building high-level crypto functionalities is hard. The operationalization bit is where things keep failing in practice. And the development of TLS is a kind of good example. So the standardization process for TLS 1.3 in IETF took about 5 years from beginning to end. And that it really didn't happen overnight. There was a lot of discussion and a lot of back and forth, and very smart people spent a lot of time modeling everything regarding TLS 1.3 to make it secure. And they more or less succeeded. There hasn't been any significant protocol level attacks on TLS 1.3 in the last 5 years. But even in 2023, we're still trying to pull the plug on TLS 1.0 from 1999. So these things hang around for a long time. And as it turned out, TLS 1.0 was a pretty good attempt in 1999, but we do know a lot more today than we knew then. I'll give just one small technical example to kind of illustrate, again, the point of how hard it is to put these things together correctly. And I've used this example a few times before because it's not very recent. But so basically, here is some Java code that does some crypto, and there are some bugs in it. But what's wrong here? Does anybody have any ideas? So there might be multiple things wrong here. I'll just walk through a few of them. So at least there's the PBE, the password-based encryption. This has a parameter that sets a kind of security level to slow down brute force attacks on the passwords. And in the code, they use the parameter 2 in the function call. And an appropriate value when this code was written would be 100,000. And today, I think best practice is something like 600,000 because brute force attacks are kind of speeded up over time. So that's a bug because it basically means that it's 50,000 times faster to brute force the passwords than it should be. And then the IV, the initialization vector, is a fixed string, and when you're using AES in CFP mode with a fixed IV, then you're basically leaking information about at least the first 16 bytes of data from your ciphertext. And and it also means that if your plain text has a certain statistical distribution, for example, if your plain text is regular text, then you might be able to decrypt completely based on statistical analysis. And so arguably there are a few more things wrong here, like using AES in CFP mode. Come on, who uses CFP mode? And shouldn't you actually be using authenticated encryption instead? And arguably you shouldn't be using PBKDF too, because even though that's standardized, that's not really what's recommended. And arguably using the Bouncy Castle library for Java, which is basically Bouncy Castle has been described as basically this zoo where you can go and watch all the strange crypto algorithms which you shouldn't be using. My take on this is actually that the mistake here is having to deal with this code in the first place. Because owning and maintaining and being responsible for this code carries a significant load, and in most cases that's a mistake. You don't want to do it. So moving to the attacker perspective, there will be bugs, and what should you be doing? What should you be doing? I think for 95% of use cases, you should try to keep things simple and look for a high-level library that's been tested and proven and fits with what you're trying to be doing. And then for those last cases, make sure that there's enough time and resources available to make it properly solid. And so where this becomes kind of difficult is where there is not any appropriate libraries available. And I think too often that's still the case. But there are some good ones out there, and you should at least look for that first. So going to my final topic, this even if you are using crypto, and even if you're using an implementation that's sound, you might still be using something that's outdated or misconfigured. And this is an example from SSL Labs using badssl.com, which is a nice resource that can be used to test server misconfigurations. And kind of the basic problem here is that good old attacks are still with us. So every attack that somebody has thought up over the years basically still applies, and they only get better over time. So the AES CBC padding oracle attack, for example, was first published 20 years ago. And it's still a great source of high impact vulnerabilities today. In short, what it does is that in a situation where you have a CBC padding oracle, an attacker will be able to decrypt and modify encrypted data in your application. And that is a problem if that data is either confidential or trusted. And there are pretty good ways to avoid this, like using authenticated encryption and not using AES CBC. But this one technique is still it will get you a lot of bug bounties if you know it and look for it. And so the flip side of the old attacks is that best practices are moving forward. So a lot of the good old stuff from the 80s and 90s should be retired. For example, I'm on the record on the internet saying that RC4 is the best cipher suit to use with TLS, and at the time I said it, that was absolutely the case. But that was 10 years ago, and it's not the case anymore. So Ron Rivest, the R in RSA, invented both RC4 and MD5, and they were great algorithms. They had a good run, and they're not useful anymore. And so it turns out that modern crypto practices and standards do eliminate a lot of these old attack classes, and authenticated encryption is a really good example of that. So when people talk about encryption, you think about confidentiality first and foremost, that you encrypt something so that people can't read it. But it turns out that you get a lot of really interesting attacks which are enabled by having an attacker who is able to modify or tamper or change data, even if it's encrypted. And so what you want to be using is really authenticated encryption, where you have an additional mechanism to avoid tampering. And there are really nice standards for that, and you should be using it instead of AES-CBC, for example. So this happened to me last week. So raise hands if this ever happened to you. The code hasn't been updated and developer quits. This is not just a crypto problem. This is a software security problem, but it certainly applies to crypto code as well. And again, I mean, what I do see is that you can't just kind of implement the crypto and put it over there and let it sit there for 10 years. It has to be maintained. You do need to install patches. You do need to make changes. You do need to version and standardize your configuration and not just the code. So wrapping up, we've had a quick look at kind of 3 ways that crypto fails in practice. So there is a little bit of a silver lining at the end here. It turns out that a lot of threat actors also don't know how to do operationally secure crypto. I've seen a few cases where basically poor crypto skills has been very helpful when we've been doing incident response. So there's something at least. Yeah, that's it. Thank you for listening. And do we have time for some questions?
Hi, thanks. That was a brilliant talk. Really interesting. Do you have a solution?
Yeah, solutions. Yeah, I think it's kind of back to some of the stuff we've been looking at here. Like, yeah, you need to keep things maintained. You need to use established standards, use higher level libraries, try to avoid going too deeply into the cryptographic weeds, because this is not really your goal, right? Your goal is to provide some functionality in a secure way and doing whatever it's supposed to be doing, being resilient to attacks. And then most of the time, I think being able to leverage standards, being able to build on kind of solid building blocks like TLS 1.3, like DNSSEC, whenever possible. That's good. Going all the way back to my starting hypothesis. Yeah. Make sure that, I mean, crypto is it gives you a nice box of tools, but you don't want to do crypto just to do crypto. You want to do crypto to accomplish something. So make sure that kind of whatever you're doing actually aligns with your goals, basically. and make sure that you think about implementation and operations and not just kind of this looks nice.
All right, question over here.
I try to speak English. Do you have any examples of lousy used crypto? Of course, there are many examples, but do you have examples that you would like to mention due to lousy use of cryptation of the examples you have mentioned? Stupid question, Sam.
Yeah, I mean it's a good question. I think I think this is the kind of key one. There are so many examples where you defeat the security not by breaking the crypto, but by reading the plain text wherever it's available. So it's not really an example of lousy crypto, but I don't know if people read basically Microsoft's blog post about how their signing key was compromised this summer, where basically the signing key had been embedded in a crash dump and they didn't spot that, and then they exported the crash dump to a less secure system, and then somebody broke into that and found it, and basically there was this whole chain of events which kind of at each step seemed a little bit implausible, but then in the end this actually happened and the key leaked and somebody used it in an attack, and it's boiled down to basically plain text. And then from the attacker perspective, being able to find the plain text and utilize it. So not really answering the question, but I think this is really the most fundamental bit, that if in fact you need cryptography for security, then you need to be also very careful around the edges where you don't have cryptography.
Thank you.
Hey, I have people I work with in different situations, like open source and colleagues and forum colleagues and friends in open source communities and stuff. And I see that thinking of security is something many of them try to avoid.
Yeah.
So I'm asking myself here, part of the solution here has to be around motivating people to start thinking of these things in a sensible way. Do you have any ideas and pointers or thoughts on how to get some progress on this direction?
I would like to turn it a little bit upside down. I think really the best way to improve security is to try to make it so frictionless that most people don't have to care about the details, because it is in fact handled. I think if the overall security of the ecosystem is reliant on a lot of people being very aware and very alert at all times, that's going to be tough to succeed. Take phishing as an example. Phishing is one of those techniques that's always going to work, because you are operating within the boundaries of the system and using it as intended. Basically, if you send CVs to HR, if you send invoices to finance, people are gonna click on it because it's their job to click on it. And so your protection against those attacks can't be reliant on kind of people not clicking. And I think that mindset kind of transfers to a lot of different contexts, that you have to build your systems in a way that where doing the secure thing is easy.